The tavern had once been a sanctuary, a hidden corner where outlaws and dreamers mingled, just outside the city's restless pulse. It thrived in a time when secrets were currency, but now it was nothing but a forgotten husk, boarded up and left to decay near the industrial veins of St. Louis. The cobblestone streets that once gave it character had been paved over with cracked asphalt, the air thick with the hum of passing freight trains. This neighborhood had been alive once, a breathing thing of whispered deals and restless ambition. I cut my teeth here first as a beat cop, then as a detective, chasing shadows in alleys that swallowed the light. It wasn't glamorous work, but it was real, honest in its own dirty way. Even as time pushed me forward, I carried those memories with me, echoes of a past that refused to die. Then I saw the building, the two-story brick structure standing defiant against time. It had once been something grand, a country estate for a wealthy family. Now, just north of downtown, it sat in a neighborhood trading its rough edges for corporate polish. The old mansion had adapted. The ground floor now held 4 office suites, the second floor, 2 upscale apartments. My office sat near the entrance, solid wood door, frosted glass panel, and gold lettering that read, Tom Parker Investigations, Security Specialist. That's me, Tom Parker. Some call me a legend. Others, a cautionary tale. I used to be a detective, a damn good one, until life threw a knockout punch I never saw coming. Now, I run my own private investigation business. I hunt down the truth, deal out justice, and cash the occasional check. Not that I need the money, the city made sure of that when they paid me to keep quiet. But sitting around, doing nothing? Not my style. I had been one of the department's best, right up until the day I walked in on my wife, Johanna, in bed with my boss, Captain Joe Harper. Harper made a move for his gun. I got to it first. What followed was a blur of fist and fury. By the time it was over, my career was in flames. Harper walked away with a bruised face and a desk job. I walked away with a severance package, a divorce, and a grudge that still tasted bitter. No longer bound by the rules, I became my own boss. I leaned back in my chair, feet on the desk, listening to the city's rhythm through the open window. I had been living upstairs for a while now, though technically, I still owned the house from my divorce. These days, it was just a rental property passive income. The view here was a different world from my old office. Instead of crumbling sidewalks and lurking danger, professionals strolled by in expensive suits, the sharp click of their heels punctuating the air. That old office had been a nightmare. The kind of place where even I thought twice about staying late. Eventually, the city condemned it. 2 weeks after I packed up, they bulldozed it. No regrets. If I was being honest, the move hadn't been entirely my decision. Abby, my girlfriend, had been pushing me to find a safer spot. My former commander, Major Taylor, had agreed. Good offices attract good business, he had told me. Once, I was Detective First Class Tom Parker. Now, I was Tom Parker, private investigator, and CEO of my own one-man operation. The settlement meant I could be selective about cases. No more chasing dead-end leads. Just me calling the shots. Smart move, Parker, I muttered to myself. Then came the knock. Firm. Measured. The shadow outside my office door shifted before the handle turned. In stepped a man who looked like he had never had a bad day in his life. Mr. Parker? His voice was crisp, every syllable laced with entitlement. I didn't need an introduction. I know who you are. Ethan Caldwell Daniels. Old money. High society. The kind of man who played philanthropist in the daylight but tightened his grip on the city's throat when no one was looking. He was my height, 6 feet 3 inches, but the similarities ended there. His silver blonde hair was perfectly styled, his eyes a cold, calculating blue. Everything about him, his custom suit, his carefully curated expression, screamed privilege. I didn't like him. What do you want? I asked, skipping the pleasantries. His jaw tightened. It's Mr. Daniels, he corrected, irritation flickering in his eyes. And I need your services. He paused, expecting me to lean in. I didn't. My wife, Cynthia, is cheating on me, he finally said. I need proof for a divorce. I leaned back, arms crossed. You're rich, Daniels. Might be cheaper to stay married. His expression remained impassive. A scandal would be worse. We have a prenup. If I can prove infidelity, she walks away with nothing. I sighed. Domestic cases were a mess. No one walked away clean. I avoided them when I could. Not interested. His eyes narrowed. I'll make it worth your time. Still not interested. His gaze flicked around my office, his disdain evident. You look like you could use the money. I smirked. Not yours. He exhaled sharply, clearly in used to rejection. I'll pay you $10,000. That got my attention. 10 grand for a case I could wrap up in a week. Hard to ignore. I raised an eyebrow. Why me? Plenty of PIs charge less. He adjusted his cufflinks, exuding quiet confidence. Jason Worth and Hunter Blaine recommended you. That was something. Worth and Blaine were among the best in the business. If they thought I was the right guy for the job, there had to be a damn good reason. I weighed my options. A quick payday for a simple case? Hard to pass up. Fine, I said. 2 weeks. If I find proof, I get the full 10. If not, I keep 5 up front. Without hesitation, Daniels pulled out a checkbook, scribbled the amount, and slid it across the desk. You'll get results. I glanced at the check before pocketing it. I'll need details. Her routine, social circle, habits, and a recent photo. He handed me a manila envelope. It's all in there. When can you start? I tucked the envelope under my arm. Already did. Daniels paused at the door, his face unreadable. I expect updates. You'll hear from me when there's something worth reporting, I replied, holding up the check. That's my policy. Take it or leave it. His shoulders tensed. Why so difficult? I met his stare, unfazed. Because I hate cases like this. They never end well. But I'll get the job done, on my terms. He exhaled sharply. Fair enough, he muttered, then left. Arrogant prick, I muttered to myself. But 10 grand was 10 grand. Later, Abby strolled in, dropping her bag by the door. How's the new office? I didn't answer, just pulled her in for a kiss. She smiled. That good? I shrugged. Landed a case. Her smile faded. You don't look thrilled. It's a divorce gig. Cheating spouse. She sighed. You always hate those. Yeah, feels like spying never ends well. She rested a hand on my chest. You just collect the facts. True, I admitted. But I've seen too many lives crumble because of what I find. Her eyes searched mine. This isn't about us, is it? I smirked. Of course not. Better not be. I chuckled. The guy offered enough money to make me care. Her eyebrow arched. How much? 2 weeks, 5 grand up front, 10 if I deliver. I held up the check. Now, let's celebrate with dinner. Then come home and test that happily ever after theory. Surveillance begins. The next morning at 10:30, I sat in my truck outside an upscale boutique. Weather was perfect. Cynthia Daniels had been inside for an hour. She's in no hurry, I muttered to a squirrel perched on a nearby tree. PI work sounds thrilling. The reality? A lot of waiting. Watching. And more waiting. 2 days of tailing Mrs. Daniels, and I had squat. No secret meetings, no hand-holding, nothing. Even her tennis coach tried flirting. She shut him down. The squirrel chattered. Watch it, or you're going in a stew pot, I warned. Cynthia finally emerged. Early 30s, tall, blonde, the kind of woman who'd been prom queen and knew it. What bugged me? She spent 90 minutes inside and walked out empty-handed. No second boutique, no spa stop. Instead, she drove across town to a small coffee shop on the south side, nowhere near her Lindell Boulevard mansion. That was interesting. I sighed. Guess I'm going in. Surveillance gets lonely. You end up talking to yourself, just for the conversation. I threw on a Cardinal sweatshirt, tugged a Rams cap low over my forehead, and slipped on oversized sunglasses before heading inside. The barista was busy, giving me time to scan the place. Cynthia sat across from a man, both gripping oversized coffee cups. She looked tense, her voice low. He smiled, took her hand, and said something that made her shoulders relax. Mid-40s, fit, wavy brown hair combed back. Well-dressed, but not Danielle's kind of wealth. The barista turned to me. Can I get you something? Coffee, I said. We have lattes, mochas. Black, I cut in. She smirked, like I was some caveman who hadn't evolved past drip coffee. I paid for my cup and took a window seat, close enough to watch. An hour passed. My coffee went cold. They finally stood. He leaned in for a kiss. She pulled away. Not ready to cross that line, at least not in public. She left, climbed into her Mercedes, and drove off. Calling that thing a car felt wrong. It was more like a rolling mansion. On my way out, I stopped at the counter. That guy in the corner. Looks familiar. Who is he? The barista glanced over. George Hamilton. She's been here with him a few times. Like the actor? She frowned. Who? Never mind. How often do they meet? 2 or 3 times a week lately. The bigger picture. That afternoon, I let Google do the heavy lifting. Hamilton was involved in one of Cynthia's charities. More interestingly, he and Daniels had butted heads over the years. Looked like Hamilton was using Cynthia to get under Daniels' skin. For the next 11 days, I followed her. Coffee, lunch, dinner, always somewhere discreet. I snapped plenty of photos. One night, I even managed to record their conversation from the next booth. Ain't technology great? I muttered after wrapping up my last night of surveillance. She hadn't slept with him, not yet. But it felt inevitable. She was holding back, teetering on the edge. I typed up my report and printed it. The meeting. The next morning, I walked into Daniels' office at 1 Metropolitan Square, the address in downtown St. Louis. His secretary barely looked up. "Mr. Parker?" I nodded. She gestured to an imposing wooden door. "Go right in." His office had the kind of skyline view that made rich men feel invincible. Floor-to-ceiling windows. The Mississippi River. The gateway arch in the distance. He didn't bother with pleasantries. "You have what I need?" He was already reaching for his checkbook. I slid a folder across the desk. "You might not like what I found." He flipped through the photos as I spoke. "That's George Hamilton. He and your wife have met several times, coffee, lunch, dinner. But as far as I can tell, nothing physical has happened." I pointed to the last set of images. Cynthia and Hamilton exchanging cheek kisses, shaking hands. Looks more like an emotional affair than a physical one. Daniels' frown deepened. "Hamilton is persuasive." "Are you sure?" "I tailed your wife morning to night. Unless he's sneaking into your bedroom, they haven't crossed that line." He sat back, muttering under his breath. I let the silence hang for a moment before pulling out my phone and hitting play. The recording crackled to life, Cynthia's voice low, carrying the kind of sadness you can't fake. She told Hamilton she felt invisible, that Daniels had married her for status, not love. She wasn't happy, but she wasn't ready to cross the line. Hamilton, ever the opportunist, gently nudged her toward it. Daniels' grip on the folder tightened, his eyes scanning the images with unreadable intensity. "I'm no marriage counselor," I said, leaning back. "But if you actually talk to your wife, you might be able to fix this." He stayed silent, lost in thought. "No need to write another check," I added. "I didn't get what you wanted." Without hesitation, Daniels reached into his desk and slid another $5,000 across the table. "You've given me plenty to think about." His expression wasn't anger. It was something else. Determination. I studied him, debating whether to say what was on my mind. Finally, I did. A word of advice. He looked up, waiting. "Don't do anything stupid where Hamilton is concerned. Would be a shame if you ended up in jail over a guy like that. Karma has a way of handling things." A tight smile flickered across his lips. "I have no intention of going to jail, Mr. Parker," he said evenly. "Of that, you can be sure." Sunday morning, I flipped through the paper, my coffee halfway to my lips when a headline caught my eye. "Fatal boating accident on Alton Lake." One name in the article stopped me cold. Abby walked in, catching me staring at the paper. "What's got you so interested?" I didn't look up. "A guy I knew died on Alton Lake." Her brow furrowed. "Who?" I exhaled slowly. "George Hamilton." She frowned. "That name sounds familiar." I glanced at her. "He's the one who was cozying up to Cynthia Daniels." Her expression darkened. "What happened?" "Boat explosion." I tapped the headline. "They're calling it a gas leak." "There are accidents on the lake every summer," Abby said, setting down her coffee. "Nothing unusual." I kept staring at the article. Just weird. Never heard of the guy before the Daniels case, and now he's popped up twice. A few weeks passed. Abby reminded me about a charity fundraiser she'd been nagging me to attend. I sighed. "Fine, but I'm not wearing a tux, and you owe me for this." She smirked, wrapping her arms around my neck before pressing her lips to mine. "Consider that a down payment," she murmured. Saturday night, we walked into the Four Seasons Ballroom, one of the most extravagant venues in St. Louis. Massive chandeliers, pristine table settings, an open bar that almost made the ticket price worth it. "They'd better be generous with the booze," I muttered. A jazz band played near the dance floor, which was big enough to host a half-court basketball game. Abby rolled her eyes. "Try to behave, will you?" We found our seats, and I went to grab drinks. As I weaved through the crowd, I spotted a familiar face. I nudged Abby. "The Daniels are here." "Sitting with the mayor." Her eyebrows lifted. "Your old client?" I nodded. Dinner was what I expected, overpriced and underwhelming. Afterward, we mingled, making small talk I'd forget by morning. Plenty of men in expensive suits looked like they'd rather be watching the game. Eventually, we drifted toward the VIP section. I didn't expect to see you here, Parker, Daniels said, swirling a whiskey in his glass. I smirked. $1,000 a plate isn't my usual scene. Had some extra cash from a job a couple months ago. Figured I'd spend it on charity. His face darkened for the briefest second before he forced a neutral expression. Cynthia, this is a business associate, he said smoothly, deliberately avoiding my name. I inclined my head slightly. Mrs. Daniels, I'm Tom Parker. This is my friend, Sophia Stewart. Cynthia shook Abby's hand, then mine, her eyes studying me. Have we met before? Daniels stiffened. I let him off the hook. I don't believe so. I nodded at them both. Pleasure to meet you, Mrs. Daniels. Good to see you again, Ethan. His jaw clenched at the deliberate use of his first name. He'd taken a dig at me, so I returned the favor. As we walked away, I muttered, looks like they patched things up. Not a chance, Abby said, glancing over her shoulder. She's miserable. I followed her gaze. The band started playing. Daniels reached for Cynthia's hand, leading her to the dance floor. She pulled away, brushing past and toward the ladies' room. See? Abby murmured. Not my problem. I took her hand. Didn't you mention something about further payment? Dance first or skip to the good part? She smiled, pulled me toward the exit, and made the choice for me. Sunday morning, I sat in my office, sipping coffee and skimming the police blotter. Old habits die hard. A short entry made me sit up. Cynthia Daniels was found dead late Saturday night, slumped in the passenger seat of her car under the Eads Bridge. What the hell was Cynthia doing there? I muttered. I grabbed my phone and dialed David Hayes, an old detective buddy of mine. After 3 rings, a groggy voice answered. Why the hell are you calling me on a Sunday? I saw a blotter report on Cynthia Daniels, I said. Know anything? That woke him up. The Cynthia Daniels? This is the first I'm hearing of it. Let me know when you do. He sighed. You know I can't discuss active cases. Silence stretched between us before his tone softened, curiosity creeping in. Then again, you're not exactly a civilian. What's your interest? Something feels off, I admitted. Another sigh. Fine. I'll check it out, but don't call me at home again. The line went dead before I could reply. I stared out the window, lost in thought. Abby walked in, refilled my cup, and perched on my lap. You look deep in thought, she murmured, running a hand through my hair. I handed her the newspaper. First George Hamilton dies in a boating accident. Now Cynthia's dead? That's not a coincidence. She barely glanced at the article. People die all the time. Sure, I said, my voice firm. But these two were connected. She folded her arms and gave me a skeptical look. I smirked. Cops have rules. I don't. Abby sighed, rubbing her temple. If this is bothering you so much, call David. I already did, I said, setting my coffee down. The official report says it was a carjacking gone bad. She arched an eyebrow. That happens. Maybe, I admitted. But Cynthia wouldn't be under the Eads Bridge unless something was up. Abby gave me a long look before waving a dismissive hand. And what exactly can you do that the cops can't? Before I could answer, she shook her head. Never mind. At 7 a.m., my phone rang, dragging me out of a dead sleep. I groaned, blindly reaching for it. This better be important. David chuckled on the other end. Consider it payback for waking me up yesterday. Want the full report? I sighed, sitting up. Go ahead. They found Cynthia half in, half out of her car, David said. Looked like she was trying to get back inside, maybe reaching for her phone. Small caliber bullet to the base of her skull. Probably a .22. I frowned. The report said carjacking? That's what it says. I let the silence drag for a second before speaking. Something's off. David's tone turned dry. Oh, great detective. Please, enlighten me. If it was a mugging, why was her purse still there? A carjacker wouldn't have left the car. And why was she on the passenger's side? David went quiet. This wasn't some random robbery, I said. This was an execution. He exhaled. I need to talk to the detectives. I'll be in touch. The call ended. I immediately dialed Liam Willard, a cybercrime specialist I trusted. Still doing side work? I asked when he picked up. Legal side work? Always, Liam replied, his voice laced with amusement. Meet me at the Flying Saucer for lunch. My treat. After a quick shower and shave, I pulled on brown slacks, a blue pinstriped shirt, and a tan cashmere blazer. When I arrived at the Flying Saucer, I spotted Liam's beat-up Chevy in the lot. Inside, he was already halfway through a burger, washing it down with a dark beer. He smirked as I slid into the booth across from him. Big Boss is in town today. We're all supposed to look busy. I waved off the offer of a drink. I need intel on Ethan and Cynthia Daniels. Liam raised an eyebrow. Legally, of course. Of course, I said with a smirk. There have been 2 passings tied to Daniels, he said, leaning back. His wife and her almost lover. I need to know if there's a connection. Liam wiped his mouth with a napkin. I'll dig around. See what pops. I gave him a pointed look. Keep it clean. He chuckled. Relax. I owe you one. Years ago, I pulled him out of a bar fight before he got himself stabbed. He hadn't forgotten. Standing, he grabbed his jacket. I'll call you by noon tomorrow. Thanks. I'll send a check. He waved me off. Lunch covers it. At 2, I rode the elevator up to Danielle's office. His secretary nodded. One moment, Mr. Parker. Smart woman. She remembered me after one meeting. Inside, Daniel sat at his oversized desk, acting busy. Why are you here? His tone was cold. I sank into a chair, casual as ever. Just wanted to offer my condolences. First Cynthia, now Hamilton. His sneer was immediate. Hamilton was no friend of mine. I tilted my head. Funny how you mentioned him first. His expression hardened. Of course, I'm devastated about my wife. Yeah, you look heartbroken. He shifted in his chair. I think you had something to do with both of their deaths, I said, watching his reaction. His face darkened. I stood. I'm looking into it. And if I'm right, you're screwed. Daniel shot to his feet, his voice low, controlled fury. You can't prove a damn thing. But if you try, I'll make your life hell. I smirked. Gumshoe? Nobody's used that since the Maltese Falcon. You're outdated, Ethan. I turned to leave, trying to slam the door for dramatic effect, only to be foiled by a slow-close mechanism. So much for the exit flourish. The next morning, I sat at my desk, sipping coffee, watching the women from the neighboring offices stroll by, my version of a morning stakeout. The quiet was shattered by my phone ringing. Tom Parker. It's Liam, he said, skipping pleasantries. Got something on the Daniels. I leaned forward. Go on. Turns out Daniels wasn't the rich one. Cynthia was. She owned the company where they met. I sat up. You sure? Positive. They tried counseling, but it didn't work. She was about to divorce him. And the prenup? He'd walk away with nothing. Even his damn car was hers. I exhaled slowly. And now he gets everything. Exactly. I leaned back in my chair, nearly tipping it over. Looks like I was right. That night at dinner, Abby caught me zoning out, staring at my plate. You've got that case-solving look, she teased, raising an eyebrow. I smiled faintly. You know me too well. She pushed her fork around her plate. So what's the case? This one's personal, I said, setting my fork down. Her brows lifted. No client. No client. Abby studied me for a moment. And what exactly are you planning to do? I leaned in slightly. Prove Ethan Daniels had his wife taken out. And probably had George Hamilton killed too. She frowned. Why take out Hamilton? I drummed my fingers on the table. You saw Cynthia at the fundraiser. She wasn't happy. Abby nodded. She barely looked at him. Wouldn't dance. Pulled away when he touched her. Exactly. I signaled for the check. I didn't see it then, but the dots connect now. I drove Abby home, taking my time. She had an early flight the next morning and would be gone for 2 days. The next morning, I finalized 2 real estate deals, sold my divorce house for a solid profit, and bought a historic home in Compton Heights. A surprise for Abby. As I walked back to my truck, my phone rang. Tom Parker. Parker, it's Liam, came the voice on the other end. What's up? You owe me one. Time to collect. I sighed. Go on. The woman who got us the Daniels intel, Stella Reyes, she's in trouble. I frowned. What kind of trouble? I leaned against the table, watching Tommy's smug expression shift. She get caught leaking? Liam's voice was grim. No. Worse. Her mom's sick, and she borrowed from a loan shark to cover the medical bills. The interest is bleeding her dry, and now he's making threats. I frowned. How bad? She borrowed $4,000. He's charging her 2% a day, over $500 a week. If she's late, he tacks on more. I let out a low whistle. Who's the shark? Tom Ledoux. Tommy the Turtle. I knew Tommy. Busted him a couple of times back in my cop days. But the bastard always found a way to slither free. Find out how much she's paid so far and where she meets him. An hour later, Liam called me back. She meets him at D's in Soulard. She's been paying $200 a week for 2 months, but she still owes $3,800. He told her if she stops paying, her mom gets hurt. Got it, I said. I'll handle it. With Abby out of town, I figured I'd grab a burger at D's. Solard was booming, young professionals fixing up old homes, new businesses moving in, and even the dive bars were getting a facelift. D's, once a grimy joint where bad deals went down, was now a trendy sports bar. At 7 p.m., I walked in and spotted Tommy lounging in a booth, silk shirt unbuttoned too far, gold chains gleaming against his chest, and cream-colored linen pants. It was an outfit that screamed, "Punch me." I smirked. Linen pants? Tommy? In St. Louis. Beside him sat Jimmy Sarge Rice, his enforcer. 6'6", 350, built like a truck that ran on pure intimidation. I stepped up to their table, my smirk settling in. "Still robbing old ladies, Tommy?" His expression darkened. "What do you want, Parker? You ain't a cop no more." I leaned in slightly. "That's your first mistake." "Oh yeah?" He shot back, eyes narrowing. "And the second?" "Thinking you can brush me off." Tommy flicked his fingers at Jimmy. "Get rid of him." Jimmy started to unfold from the booth. I casually flipped my coat back, resting my hand on my Glock. "No need to get up." Jimmy hesitated, looked at Tommy, then slowly sat back down. Tommy smirked. "You said I made 2 mistakes. What's the other one?" "Stella Reyes." I let the name hang in the air. "She borrowed $4,000. She's been paying you every week, but the principal barely budged." "That ridiculous fig?" "That's your second mistake." Tommy opened his mouth, but I raised a hand, cutting him off. "She'll pay what she owes, no more, no less. No interest. You've already made $4,000 in profit. That's enough." He sneered. "You don't tell me how to run my business, Parker." "You're right," I said, smiling coldly. "Because I don't need proof or rules." The meaning landed. His eyes flicked to my sidearm. "You gonna shoot me?" he asked, half bravado, half doubt. I winked. "Think about it." He let out a sharp breath, deflating. "Fine. No more Vic. But she better pay up." Satisfied, I pulled a card from my pocket and flicked it onto the table. "If there's a problem, call me. Don't send your goons. Don't break anything." "Got it." Tommy glared but didn't answer. I turned for the door. "Nice doing business with you, Tommy." On the drive home, I made a call. "Jake there?" I asked when someone picked up. A few seconds later, Jake's voice came on the line. "Parker, what's up? Meet me at Molly's." Molly's was a hole in the wall where business stayed off the books. Jake, the snake, Stedman was a pro informant, con man, and thief. If anything shady happened in St. Louis, he had a hand in it or knew someone who did. I walked in, let my pistol flash accidentally, and slid into a booth. "I need to know if Cynthia Danielle's passing was random or a contract hit." Jake shrugged. "I'll see what I can dig up." "You'll find something. You always do." I stood, leaving my card. "Call me." The next night, my phone buzzed. "Parker, it's Jake," he said, his voice low. "Got something for you." That was fast. Jake let out a dry chuckle. "The sooner I put distance between us, the better." "What did you find?" "A guy named Wiley Thornton and his crew took out Hamilton and Daniels," Jake said. "Thornton was bragging in a bar, trying to impress some guy connected to Vito Sicleri." I clenched my jaw. "So he was showing off?" "Yeah," Jake confirmed. "Said he got $100,000 for both jobs." "How many in his crew?" "2," Jake said. "But Thornton's the one to watch." He hesitated, then added, "Look, I don't like you, but you've always been straight with me, so I'll warn you, Thornton's bad news." "Noted," I said evenly. "If your info checks out, we're even." "Good," Jake muttered, relieved. "I always get in trouble around you, Parker." I hung up. I had a name. On the way home, my mind shifted gears, thinking about the house I'd bought for Abby. She was back from her trip, so I took her for a drive through Compton Heights. As we passed a massive white stone house, I slowed down. "That one's nice, huh?" Abby nodded, admiring the carved mahogany doors. "Let's check it out." I pulled into the driveway. She frowned. "Tom, we can't just—" I grinned. "The owner won't mind." I helped her out of the car, then dropped the surprise. "I bought this house for us." Her mouth fell open. 6 bedrooms, 4 baths, I said casually, watching her expression shift from shock to something warmer. "Just under 6,000 square feet." Abby turned, slowly taking it all in. Then she looked at me. "You're serious?" I nodded. She exhaled, then laughed softly. "You are insane." I wrapped an arm around her waist. "You love it." She smirked. "Yeah, I do." I leaned against the porch railing, watching Abby take it all in. She ran her fingers over the carved wooden banister, eyes scanning the high ceilings and massive windows. "It needs work," But we can fix it up while staying at my place, I said, watching her reaction. That is, if you like it. If not, we'll fix it up and sell it. She turned and threw her arms around me. Don't even think about selling our house. Let's go inside. That afternoon, I gave Abby a full tour. She gave me one too, pointing out every cracked tile, chipped molding, and leaky faucet. We stayed until sunset, soaking in the possibilities. By morning, I had the utilities turned on. Electricity and running water made the place feel more like a home, less like an empty relic. Now it's our home, Abby murmured, curling up beside me on the porch. Over the next few weeks, we found a contractor, a father and son duo who understood what we wanted. My role? Writing the checks. I had just one request. The den is mine, I told Abby. She rolled her eyes, but didn't argue. One evening, as I grabbed my jacket, Abby's gaze followed me. Your friends in low places find something? She asked, half teasing, half cautious. Yeah, I said, keeping my tone light. But I need to confirm a few things. I didn't mention that I was tracking a hitman. She worried enough as it was. Back by one, I added, opening the door. Don't wait up. I kissed her, grabbed my truck keys, and left. Some places weren't safe for a Cadillac, let alone my Corvette. I took the truck. If Wiley Thornton was my guy, I'd know soon enough. And if he was? He had no idea what was coming. Just past midnight, I stepped out of a dive bar on Lindell Boulevard, my mind running through everything I'd picked up that night. As I reached for my truck door, movement in the window's reflection made me pause. A car pulled up behind me. A man stepped out. I turned sharply. He stopped about 20 feet away. Average height, average build, dark hair, hard to tell under the flickering streetlights. Jeans, sleeveless sweatshirt. The only real standout was the revolver at his side. A second guy climbed out and moved to his side. Get in the car, the first guy ordered, motioning with the weapon. I slowly flipped back my jacket, letting them get a good look at the Glock resting at my hip. Come on, man, the second guy said. Jasper will shoot you. He don't care. Shut up, Boyd, Jasper snapped. He turned back to me. Get in the car, Parker. Well, now we know each other's names. Makes this easier, I said, smirking. Jasper frowned. My calmness unsettled him. He glanced at Boyd. That second of hesitation was all I needed. I rested my hand on my Glock. Boyd grabbed for his own. Who's your boss? I asked. You'll find out soon enough, Jasper said. Get in, or we'll pay a visit to that which you run around with. Wrong move. Jasper started to raise his weapon, then froze when he saw my grip tighten. That's a .38, right? I said, keeping my voice steady. You might get one shot off. Maybe even hit me. But this. I tapped my Glock. This is a .45 with a hair trigger. Before you pull twice, I'll have two in you and maybe one in Boyd. I tilted my head. So tell me, do you feel lucky? Apparently, they did. Both raised their weapons. Jasper fired first. He missed. He never got a second shot. Boyd didn't fire at all. Two quick shots, double tap, just like Tully taught me, took Jasper down. A third put Boyd on the ground. Not dead, but wishing they were. I kicked their weapons away, then pulled out my phone, holding it where they could see. You boys look rough. Want me to call an ambulance? Jasper groaned. Come on, Parker. I'm bleeding out. Tell me who sent you, and I'll make the call. Silence. Nearest hospital is 10 blocks north, I said, stepping toward my truck. I don't think you'll make it. Jasper coughed, gasping. Wiley Thornton. Bingo. He told us to make you stop asking about Hamilton and Daniels. His boss told him to shut you down. I crouched down. Who's his boss? Jasper's voice was barely a whisper. Daniels. Gotcha. I called emergency services, then dialed David Hayes. You really love waking me up, he grumbled. Two guys just tried to abduct me, I said. I already called emergency. David was instantly awake. On my way. Don't say a damn word until I get there. Patrol cars arrived fast. I set my Glock on my truck's hood. No way was I getting shot by some rookie with an itchy trigger finger. The EMTs rolled in next, stabilizing Jasper and Boyd before loading them into ambulances. David pulled up minutes later, concern written all over his face. You okay? He asked as he stepped out. What happened? They invited me for a ride, I said, brushing dust off my jacket. I declined. They got pushy. I handled it. Who sent them? I hesitated, glancing away. Come on, Tom. I know you, David said, crossing his arms. You squeezed it out of them. I didn't respond. Tom, he said, lowering his voice. Once they hit the hospital, they'll clam up. Give me something. Not yet, I said firmly. If I tell you now, you have to investigate, and that'll tip him off. Let me make it stick. David didn't look happy, but he gave a reluctant nod. Another unmarked car pulled up. Captain Joe Harper stepped out. Perfect. The man who wrecked my marriage. The reason I lost my badge. Well, I said, voice thick with sarcasm. Look who drew the short straw. Harper's expression darkened. Guess you're not as high up as you thought. I continued. Midnight calls. That's got a sting. He ignored me, turning to the officers on scene. When he finally faced me, his tone was ice. What did you do, Parker? I shrugged. Told the patrolman. Told Detective Hayes. Not saying another word without my lawyer. Harper smirked. You still hate me, don't you? I let out a sharp laugh. Hate you? Haven't thought about you in 5 years, Joe. You're not that important. You put 2 guys in the hospital, he said, his voice rising. Could have been body bags, I shot back. His face turned red. You're not walking away from this. Unless you're arresting me, I said, stepping toward my truck. I'm going home. I climbed into the cab. Something caught my eye. A fresh bullet hole in the frame. Guess Jasper wasn't as bad a shot as I thought, I muttered. When I got home, Abby was asleep on the couch. She must have been waiting up. I kicked off my boots, lay down behind her, and pulled her close. She stirred, her voice thick with sleep. I fell asleep. Sorry, she yawned. Want coffee? Want to tell me what happened? In the morning, I murmured, tightening my hold around her. Go to sleep. She sighed against my chest. Love you. Love you too, I whispered. Morning came too soon. Abby was already awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a fresh cup of coffee when I walked in. She studied me as I poured myself a cup, waiting for me to speak. I need you to do something, I said finally. You're not going to like it, but I need you to do it anyway. She didn't flinch. Okay. I frowned. Just like that. She reached for my hand, giving it a small squeeze. Just like that. I trust you. I exhaled. 2 men pulled guns on me last night. Tried to shove me into a car. When I refused, they threatened you. Her jaw tightened. I assumed they regretted that. They're in the hospital, I said, taking a sip of coffee. But their boss wanted them to send a message. And he's not done. I leaned forward. I want you to go visit your parents for a few days. Her lips parted, but I cut her off before she could argue. You've got vacation time. Your dad would love to see you. And I won't have to worry if you're with him. A long pause stretched between us. Finally, she leaned in and kissed me. Let me get packed. An hour later, she tossed a suitcase into her car, gave me one last look, then drove off. Back at my office, I picked up the phone and called David. You ever get tired of waking me up, Tom? He grumbled. Giving you a break this time. David snorted. What do you got? Cynthia Daniels had all the money, I explained. She was divorcing Ethan. If she went through with it, he'd be broke. David stayed quiet. I started digging, I continued. A guy named Wiley Thornton's been bragging about taking out both Hamilton and Cynthia. David let out a sharp breath. Damn. And one of the guys who tried to grab me admitted it. David's voice hardened. Let us handle it, Tom. You won't get to him like I will, I said. I'm going to talk to Thornton. See if he slips. Tom, don't do anything stupid. I set my cup down. They threatened Abby, David. That's all I needed to hear. David exhaled. If things go sideways, I'll call you, I said. And if you don't, then I guess we'll see what happens. David sighed. The second you have something solid, you call me. I hung up. Aubriana's Deli sat on Shaw Avenue near the Kings Highway overpass. It was a staple in the Hill, St. Louis, old-school Italian neighborhood. 2 things made it stand out. First, the food. Best sandwiches in town. Strongest coffee. Second, it doubled as Vito Sicleri's office. Vito ran the St. Louis mob, gambling, loan sharking, labor unions. He had a hand in everything except pills. Pills are a plague, he once told me. People will always gamble, always get in over their heads. I just make sure they owe the right people. Despite his reputation, Vito took care of his neighborhood. He funded St. Ambrose Church, backed community projects, and made sure struggling families got help. If a man gambled or drank his paycheck away, Vito had a conversation with him. The problem never happened again. I walked in. Vito sat at his usual spot, flanked by 2 men built like small bulldozers. Nearby, Rudy Cassidy leaned against a table. He wasn't Italian, but he was trusted, dangerous, and always watching. We'd crossed paths before, not as enemies, Just professionals on opposite sides. I nodded to the doorman and approached Vito's table. Mr. Sicleri, I said evenly. I need a word. Vito gestured to the seat across from him, a faint smirk tugging at his lips. Last time I saw you, you were trying to put me away on a gambling charge. I took the seat. We never had enough to make it stick. Vito shrugged. Some cops would have planted evidence. I don't play like that, I replied. If I wanted you gone, I wanted it to be real. His smirk faded slightly. I need to talk to someone at the Hard Case Tavern. Vito raised an eyebrow. And why ask me? Come on, Vito. Everyone knows you run the South Side, I said. If you don't own the hard case, you control it. His expression stayed neutral. Who are you looking for? Wiley Thornton. No flicker of recognition. No reaction. He's not working for you, I said. But he's been hanging around, trying to get in, running his mouth to Sammy hands, looking for an in. Vito took a slow sip of espresso, then set his cup down. Why do you care about Thornton? Someone hired me for a job, I said, lowering my voice. That same someone hired Thornton to clean up loose ends. I want Thornton, and I want his boss. A long pause. Then Vito gave a slow nod. You always played straight with me, Parker. Even when you were a cop. Go ahead and talk to him. I'll tell Sammy to stay out of it, as long as you don't make a mess. I stood, nodded in thanks, and turned to leave. Before I could, Rudy stepped in front of me. If you need backup, Parker, call me, he said with a grin. I don't like nobody's trying to take my job. I got this, Rudy. As I walked out to my truck, one thought lingered. I really wouldn't want Vito or Rudy mad at me. It was still early when I called Abby. When can I come home? She asked, her voice soft but tinged with worry. Give me 3 or 4 days, I replied. Then I'll come down, and we'll spend a few days on the river. Maybe do some fishing. You could just come now and let the cops handle it, Abby suggested, her voice firm but edged with concern. David doesn't have enough to move yet, I told her. And the 2 guys who jumped me? They're keeping their mouths shut. If they were charged, I'd give David most of what I know. She exhaled sharply. And if he gets a chance to act on it? Then I'll back his play. She went quiet for a beat, then sighed. Just promise me you won't do anything reckless. I nodded, though she couldn't see it. I promise. We shifted the conversation to lighter things. Our trip, fishing spots, the best places to grab a steak near her parents' house. It was a welcome distraction. The next morning at 9 a.m., I dialed David. Jesus, Parker, you again, he groaned. I need to talk to Jasper. The guy who tried to drag you into a car? Yeah. They lie. I know, I cut in. They lawyered up. But let me try. Why? Because if you let me, I'll hand you a double homicide case. Silence. Then a heavy sigh. Tomorrow. 9 a.m. holdover cells. And Tom, if you step out of line, I can't cover your ass. St. Alexius Hospital, prison ward. Jasper stared at me from his hospital bed, arms crossed, jaw clenched. Boyd sat beside him, his leg wrapped in bandages. Why the hell should we help you? Boyd sneered. Shut up, Jasper muttered, glaring at him before turning back to me. Serious, Parker. What? You think Thornton's gonna bail you out? I asked, my voice even. You're looking at serious time, and Wiley's out there enjoying his freedom. Jasper said nothing, but the muscle in his jaw ticked. I can't make your charges disappear, I continued. But I can make sure you're not a dead man walking inside. Jasper stiffened, the first real reaction he'd given me. You know Vito Sicleri? I asked. That got his attention. Vito doesn't like outsiders stepping on his turf, I went on. Help me nail Thornton, and I'll make sure Vito lets it be known that you two are under his protection. Boyd didn't even hesitate. That's good enough for me. Jasper hesitated, shooting him a sharp look before glancing back at me. I don't need a story, I said. I need the truth. Tell the DA exactly what Thornton said about Daniels ordering the job. Jasper exhaled slowly, considering. Finally, he gave a curt nod. Fine. I'll talk. I turned to the door. David. David stepped in, his expression unreadable. They're ready to roll, I told him. Call the DA. Let's make it stick. David pulled out his phone as I stepped outside, breathing deep for the first time in a while. As I climbed into my truck, David caught up with me. Jasper and Boyd gave up Wiley Thornton, he said, rubbing a hand over his face. Said he ordered the hit on Cynthia Daniels and arranged Hamilton's death. Tied him straight to both cases. He gave me a sideways look. What did you say to get them to flip? Told them Rudy Cassidy was pissed, and that Vito Sicleri would claim them inside, I said casually. David let out a low whistle. You really think Vito will? Not for them, I admitted. But for Rudy? Yeah. He's not letting his guy get dragged into Thornton's mess. David sighed, shaking his head. You know I gotta take Thornton down, and you can't be involved. I know, I said. But you can't just march into the hard case and slap cuffs on him. He'll see it coming. David studied me. So you go in first, we wait outside? I nodded. Why face him yourself? He asked, frowning. Because Thornton's just the hammer. The real target is Ethan Daniels. David folded his arms. Tom, this case against Thornton is thin. A lawyer will pick it apart. Maybe, I admitted. Or maybe I can make him believe we've got enough to fry him. David exhaled sharply, clearly reluctant. I'll call you when I have him, I said. The Harcase Tavern. 8 p.m. A long, narrow bar, barely 30 feet wide, but stretching back 70 feet. Dim lighting, stale beer smell, and the kind of patrons who minded their own business. I had called David. He and 3 uniforms waited outside. Inside, Wiley Thornton sat at the bar, holding court like a guy who thought he was untouchable. I walked up. Let me buy you a drink, Wiley. He turned, his ego puffing up like a cheap suit. Do I know you? Not yet, I said. But you will. The bartender set his drink down. I reached for it, dumped the contents, and slid the empty glass into a plastic evidence bag. I handed it off to David, who sighed but signed the envelope. Sammy Hands, the manager, watched in silence. Mr. Sicleri called, he muttered, disappearing into his office. I turned back to Wiley. You're a dumbass, you know that? I said. Bragging about contract work in a bar full of strangers? Talking in a crime, he sneered. Jasper and Boyd thought the same thing until they rolled on you. I leaned in. They gave us everything. The Daniels job. The Hamilton hit. So what? Their word against mine. He stood, ready to leave. I didn't move. He swung, a lazy, sloppy roundhouse, the kind only an amateur throws. I stepped in, drove a fist into his gut, and let gravity do the rest. Wiley folded, gasping. I slid my jacket aside, just enough for him to see the Glock. Hey, Wiley, I said, my tone smooth. I hear you're crazy. Lucky for you. So am I. So how about you sit back down and have a nice chat? His eyes darted between my weapon and my face. He climbed back onto his stool. David let out a slow exhale, clearly not thrilled with my method. It's not just Jasper and Boyd's word, I continued. Wiley's smirk faltered. We pulled prints from Hamilton's boat and Cynthia's car. No hits in the system yet. I gestured to the evidence bag. I bet those prints match. His face tightened. Detective Hayes, I said, nodding toward David, is here to keep things by the book. You can't take my prints unless I'm arrested, Wiley muttered. Wrong, I countered. That glass? Public property now. And your name from Jasper and Boyd? That's enough to bring you in. Wiley shrugged. Fine. Take me in. David didn't hesitate. He snapped on the cuffs. Wiley Thornton, you're under arrest for questioning in the homicides of George Hamilton and Cynthia Daniels. As David read Wiley his rights, I leaned in just enough for him to hear me clearly. Here's the deal, Wiley, I said, my voice calm but firm. Your guy's already flipped. Your prints are about to sink you. But if you tell us who paid you, maybe we can get the DA to take the execution off the table. Wiley swallowed, his cocky expression cracking just a little. What kind of deal? Testify against Daniels, I said. You'll still do life, but at least you'll still be breathing. He shifted in his seat, his eyes darting between me and David, then leaned back, arms crossed. I'll wait for my lawyer. David motioned for the patrol officers to take him away. As they led Wiley out, David turned to me, brows drawn together. You realize the second Thornton talks to his lawyer, they're gonna demand the fingerprint report, he said. Yeah, I replied. David's frown deepened. We don't have a fingerprint report. I know, I admitted. David stared at me, frustration clear. Tom, what the hell are you up to? Hold him for questioning, I said. We've got 48 hours. I'll get what we need. Later, inside the interrogation room, David placed a recorder on the table. Suspect, Wiley Thornton. Legal representation, Public Defender Marcus Evans. Present, Detective David Hayes and Consultant Tom Parker, David stated for the record. Then he turned to Wiley. You're a suspect in 2 homicides. Anything you want to say? Wiley leaned back in his chair, smirking. Prove it. David's phone buzzed. He sighed, switched off the recorder, and stood. Excuse me. As soon as David stepped out, I leaned forward. My voice dropped, steady as ever. We've got you, Wiley. When the fingerprint results come back, they'll tie you to both crime scenes. He barely flinched, but I caught the flicker of doubt. Evans, his lawyer, spoke up. We expect all evidence to be disclosed. I shrugged. Far as I know, since Wiley hasn't been charged, we don't have to share anything yet. Evans narrowed his eyes. Then why is he in custody? David re-entered, this time with a tall, no-nonsense woman in a sharp suit. He flipped the recorder back on. Wiley, if you cooperate, you might just win yourself a prize. I smirked. Detective Hayes, tell our lucky contestant what he could win. David gestured toward the woman. Assistant DA Rachel Carter. Carter took the seat across from Wiley and Evans, her expression unreadable. Give us a statement, your involvement, and who hired you, and I'll speak to the DA about your charges. David leaned forward. You're done, Wiley. The only question is how bad it's gonna be. Wiley and his lawyer whispered back and forth. Finally, Evans sighed. Take execution off the table, and my client will talk. Carter nodded. If he tells the truth, the DA won't seek the death penalty. Wiley exhaled slowly. Evans added, and life sentence with parole eligibility after 25 years. I met Carter's eyes. We'd worked together before. I knew she'd make sure the screws tightened just enough. David tapped the table. Thornton. Wiley exchanged a glance with Evans, then gave a slow nod. All right, what do you want to know? Did you kill George Hamilton and Cynthia Daniels? Carter asked, her tone sharp. Wiley hesitated, then muttered, Yeah. Who hired you? The broad's husband, Wiley started, but Carter's glare stopped him mid-sentence. He cleared his throat. I mean, Ethan Daniels. He paid me $100,000. For the record, Carter said, her voice firm. Wiley shifted uncomfortably. Ethan Daniels hired me. Did he tell you why? He hesitated again before shaking his head. Just told me to take care of Hamilton first, then his wife. How? Carter pressed. Wiley smirked, as if reliving the memory. Hamilton's boat had an air pump to clear gas fumes from the bilge. I disconnected it, scraped the insulation off the starter wires. He turned the key boom. Carter's jaw tightened. And Cynthia Daniels? She was coming out of some shop in Frontenac, Wiley said, his tone casual, like he was reciting a grocery list. Hands full of bags. I knocked her down. David's voice was cold, sharp. She was fighting for her life. She didn't drop easy, Wiley admitted with a shrug. That pissed me off. Carter's voice didn't waver. Where did you shoot her? Back of the head. .22 caliber. I clenched my jaw. 2 innocent people were dead because I took Danielle's case in the first place. Carter looked at David and me. Anything else? We both shook our heads. She turned to Wiley. The DA will honor the deal because of your testimony. Wiley smirked, thinking he had one. Carter wasn't done. You'll serve your time in Jefferson City Correctional. She paused. Boonville, to be exact. The smirk vanished. I leaned in, voice low. Hope you like your new home, Wiley. I hear the guys there love fresh meat. David stood. On your feet. Wiley was officially booked. Evans jumped in. You should have read him his rights before questioning. David smirked. We did. When we brought him in. You were sitting right there, remember? Now Wiley was officially in custody. A nearby officer led him away. I exhaled. I wanted Wiley, but Daniels was the real target. Carter adjusted her bag. This case is solid. Evans will push back, but he'll take the deal. She nodded at us. Next time, call me for something easier. As she left, I shook my head. That woman's a shark. She wants to be DA, David said. And I wouldn't bet against her. We walked outside to his car, illegally parked in a loading zone. You sure you can park here? I asked, smirking. David shot me a look. Unloading a case for a butcher. I laughed. Traffic division isn't dumb. They don't ticket unmarked cars. Could belong to a captain. They don't want that headache. When do we go after Daniels? I asked, glancing at David. David paused, clearly weighing his options before giving a long sigh. Well, partner, he drawled in an exaggerated Ethan Wayne imitation. I reckon we could round him up right now. I grinned. Might as well saddle up with the posse then. David dropped the accent, his voice becoming serious again. I want to arrest him in front of his employees. Let them see him dragged out in cuffs. I opened the passenger door and climbed in. I like your style, cowboy. Let's ride. David started the car, giving me a sideways glance. I talked to Liam this morning, he said, his tone shifting to something more guarded. He told me something interesting. I raised an eyebrow. What's that? It's about you, David muttered, clearly reluctant to elaborate. I hesitated, then shrugged. You had Liam pull Danielle's financials, didn't you? David shot me a quick, irritated look. Damn it, Tom. Liam works for the police, not your PI firm. I smirked. Relax, he did it on his lunch break. David shook his head in disbelief. You're reckless. You know that? Yeah. I waved him off. What did he find? David sighed, clearly frustrated. 2 large withdrawals, one after Hamilton's death, the other after Cynthia's. 50 grand each. I leaned back, absorbing the info. That's 100 grand, the exact amount Wiley was paid. David gave a small smirk. With Wiley's confession, that locks Daniels down tight. I cracked my knuckles. Let's put him away. We pulled up to Danielle's office, a modern glass and steel tower downtown. As we stepped inside, I spotted his assistant, the same sharp woman who had remembered me from months ago. Mr. Parker, she greeted with a polite smile. Nice to see you again. Mr. Daniels is in a meeting. Would you like to wait? David flashed his badge. No, ma'am, we'll handle it from here. He led the way through the large wooden door into Danielle's office. The assistant reached for the phone, but I raised a finger and shook my head. She hesitated before putting the receiver back down. Ethan Daniels sat at a conference table, flanked by 3 men. A younger guy was beside a rolling cart, presenting graphs and pie charts on a large screen. How anyone could concentrate with that view of the Mississippi River outside was beyond me. David strode in, his badge on display. Daniels stood, his face showing clear irritation. Ethan Daniels, you're under arrest, David announced. Danielle's jaw tightened. On what charge? His tone was annoyed but not fearful. Premeditated homicide, conspiracy, accessory before and after the fact, David replied, listing off the charges without flinching. And that's just the start. David pulled out a laminated card and began reading Daniels' rights. But Daniels wasn't waiting around. The moment David looked at the card, Daniels bolted for the door. That idea. I was already in his way. I landed a sharp left to his jaw. He staggered, dropping to the floor, sliding across the slick wood floors until I stood over him. I grinned. Told you I'd get you, Ethan. David quickly rolled Daniels onto his stomach and slapped the cuffs on. Add fleeing and obstruction to the list, David muttered. As David hauled Daniels to his feet, I gave him an innocent look. Did I get too involved? David sighed and shook his head. Shut up. Let's get him booked. We moved through the hallway, and I ran my hand over the polished woodwork of the office walls. You know, I think we should refinish the wainscoting. I never understood why people paint over wood like this. Abby and I had been hard at work on the Compton Heights house, restoring its classic features while updating the essentials, plumbing, wiring, and HVAC. The summer breeze blew in through the large windows, clearing out the lingering fumes of fresh paint. Before she could respond, my phone rang, interrupting the moment. Tom Parker, I answered, already feeling irritated. It's David, came the voice on the other end. I straightened, sensing something important. What's going on? Just a heads up, David said. The DA isn't cutting Daniels any breaks. He's prosecuting personally, says Daniels is gonna pay for everything. David chuckled. I guess it's an election year. 3 months had passed since Daniels' arrest. Good, I said, my tone growing firmer. Let me know when the trial's set. I want to see his face when he hears guilty. I paused for a second. You and the wife want to meet us at Ragazzi's tonight? Abby raised an eyebrow when I hung up, clearly catching on to my shift in mood. Daniels, she asked. I nodded. Good, she said, giving me a small smile. Now you can focus on our house. Our house, huh? I kept my face unreadable, watching her carefully. She gave me a curious look, trying to gauge if I was messing with her. I walked over to my jacket, pulled out a thick stack of papers, and handed them to her. Her eyes scanned the top page, then she slowly smiled. That's the new deed, I said. Owners, Tom and Sophia Parker. Her mouth parted in surprise, and I shrugged. Figured if it's legal, we should make it official. Her smile widened, still processing the words, when I pulled out the ring and slid it onto her finger. And by the way, I murmured, I love you. She stared at the ring, turning her hand to catch the light. Sliding it up and down her finger, adjusting to the weight, she finally looked up at me with a teasing grin. I've always wanted to own property,